Hi, my name is Melissasigodo and I'm your host of The Space. Today we have an amazing guest with us and you probably know her already, but she is the Deputy Mayor of London for Communities and Social Justice. We have Debbie Weeks-Bernard. Hi, Debbie.
Hi, Melissa.
How you doing?
I'm good.
Yeah?
Yeah, good to be here. Yeah.
It's been a heavy year so far.
Yes, and it's only the beginning of February.
And it's only the beginning of February. It doesn't even, it feels like, well, as everyone always says, January feels like 100 days in a month.
It does.
But already we're kind of flying through the year and so much has happened. And of course, we saw this year that Donald Trump was inaugurated president.
Yep.
We saw what, took place at his inauguration that obviously people had many thoughts on. Since then, we've seen that he has launched attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there's a lot of conversation to be had about that, I think. And who better to have that conversation with than the deputy of the most diverse city in London, possibly the world, than you.
Yes.
So, my first question, I just wanted to know your thoughts. What do you make of the term diversity hire?
It's a hugely derogatory term. It has, ever since, obviously, you've mentioned what's happened with the inauguration of the 47th President of the United States. And it has become a weaponized term, certainly, on social media and elsewhere. I think it's been incredibly damaging what has happened with the raft of executive orders that President Trump has written for just the progress that has been made with regards to breaking down many of those barriers that racially minoritized communities have experienced when trying to access work, opportunities, access to services, you name it. And I think what's so troubling about it is that, yes, this is something that's happening on, across the pond. So it's not even happening here in the UK, but the ramifications for us are immense, particularly those of us who've worked on racial equity issues for decades, because now there seems to be just an emboldening of a certain type of narrative, which is hugely harmful. So seeing a person of colour in a position of power, responsibility, seeing them getting access to all sorts of opportunities, now there are those who feel that they have the permission to say, you must have just been a diversity hire. You didn't get there by virtue of merit or skill or aptitude. It was as a result of these policies, which they find particularly demeaning. So it's actually really problematic. And it takes us back decades on so much that we've achieved, not just in the US, but certainly here and in other parts of the world. So it's actually quite scary, if I'm honest, and deeply upsetting.
And you're the first Black female deputy mayor of London. Have you ever had people judge you and look at you as though you're unfit to really?
I have. And it's really interesting because when I was at law school, after I did my PhD, I went to law school because that's what you do.
Educated woman.
Well, I don't know if that...
Well, on this space, you are going to meet a lot of women, Black women who are extremely educated. So there we go. PhD, yes. Carry on.
Well, I went to look. I had taken a career break. I just had my second child, and I'd taken a career break. And obviously, what you're supposed to do with a career break is take a career break, right? And I just thought, no, actually, I think what I need to do is go to law school. So I was at law school, and I met an amazing group of people who, frankly, I would never have come across. I think if I hadn't made an application to do something like that. And these were young people who'd been educated through Oxbridge, had been privately educated. They were going to become barristers, solicitors, you name it. And I remember having conversations with some of them where they'd say to me, I was kind of worried about what kind of direction I could go in as a woman from a working class background who at this time had 2 children and hadn't gone through a traditional education process. So my educational experiences were not as positive as they could have been, which for many law firms is a problem when they hire. So they look at everything that you've achieved, even from the age of 16 upwards. And so I knew that that was putting me at a huge disadvantage. And I remember having all these conversations with these young, amazing people. And they were saying to me, well, you know, you'd be fine because you're Black. And, you know, you could just say you're Black, you've got a PhD, you've had a difficult upbringing, you'll be fine. They'll love you.
Wow, that's horrific.
And it's really, it was so eye-opening because it completely reframed any kind of conversation I think I'd had with them up until that point. But it was something that it was a widely held belief that if you were from a non-traditional background, there was this expectation that you could use it as a way of trying to open doors, and that there would be people who would be willing to open those doors for you because they would see you as this Black, aspirational young person. Well, not that young at that time, I was in my 30s. And that was what was going to enable you to get into a position.
And people say this is a matter of fact,
completely.
To your face.
With their chests. And I was completely flabbergasted by it. But, you know, these are the conversations that people have. And not a lot of us are exposed to them. And when you hear it, it actually makes you reevaluate every conversation you've ever had throughout your career with a person with whom you thought you were having a sort of a conversation based on equality, merit, and all of those. Yeah, absolutely. And so I think where we've got to now with this DEI higher sort of narrative is that people think that, oh, there are scores of individuals to whom this has happened. And that's quite frankly so untrue. It really isn't the case at all. And people who get onto schemes to try to gain access to the professions, which is an important thing for them to be able to do, those schemes exist because there are barriers that are set up, which prevent them from being able to access those jobs. So it's really damaging. And I think that all it will lead to is less diverse spaces, less diverse professions, people worrying and wondering about how they'd got into a position. And it takes the narrative back and takes the progress that we've made back, which is so disheartening.
It is. And I think there are people out there, Black people, who will feel like, you know, I have to show people this is what I've achieved. I've got this, I've got this. And actually, you shouldn't have to. Yeah. You shouldn't have to list out all your achievements for people who haven't even achieved as much as you. Yeah. Not even half as much as you.
Yeah.
But there is also this narrative that's been put out there that diversity, equity, and inclusion is anti-white.
Yeah. Yeah, there is.
Where do you think this is coming from? Do you think this is just for political gain? Because we see the climate that we're in where minorities are attacked.
Yes.
A lot.
Yes.
We saw the summer riots last year, which were absolutely, I feel like insane is the only way to describe it, because I could believe it was happening, but seeing it play out was quite something to see. Mm-hmm. But yeah, now this narrative that somehow equality is an attack on white people. Yeah. Where do you think that comes from?
I don't think it's new. I think it's something which has been around for a long time. It's like this concept of whataboutery. So whenever you see gains being made for any group which is underrepresented, it could be women, it could be those from minoritized groups, you get this set of voices saying, well, what about us? What does this mean for us? And it's a really dangerous sort of comparison to make. So if you have a set of successes for one group, there is this presumption that that means that there will be fewer successes for another group. And I think this has been it's been a long-standing, steadily creeping narrative that has been developing, across political landscapes, absolutely. But it's something which the right co-opted. It's something which the far right is incredibly gleeful about. And I think it's this notion that using the word or the phrase racism is offensive to white people, and that racism doesn't actually really exist. And that when you say that there is a racist structure or that racism impacts upon particular groups, there is this presumption that what you're effectively saying is that you are blaming every white person in the world for a particular situation. And I find that it's really hard to come up with the words, because I've worked in race equity for so long. I find it really lazy, actually, because there are people who have come from minority ethnic backgrounds who have experienced barriers in a range of different areas, from poverty to work, to healthcare. And these have been long-standing barriers, which makes the argument for racism and racial structures very, very pertinent. And it's embedded in the way people make decisions. It's embedded in the way policies are created. And it isn't about blaming an entire group of people for the situation in which Black, brown and other minoritized communities find themselves. It's about calling out structures which hold other people back. And it is absolutely and entirely possible to be able to say racism exists without then every white person assuming that you're saying that they are the ones who have caused the racism to exist. And I think what we need more of is allyship. We need people standing up and saying, yes, these are real situations, and we want to do something about it, rather than assuming that when we say that it's something about them. And I worry that with the way that the narrative is developing now, that increasingly more and more of those sorts of conversations are going to be had. One example, we have launched a slavery memorial. And we are going to, hopefully that will all be done and dusted in 2026. And I think one of the things around the slavery debate, which is not unique to us, but one of the things around the slavery debate is that you have people who say, why are you blaming us for something that our forefathers did? Why are you blaming us as a group of white individuals for slavery, which happened generations and generations and generations ago? And when we talk about slavery and talk about the impact that it has on Black people, Black lives, we are not talking about blaming, groups of white children in schools who are just going about and living their lives. We are talking about acknowledging and having an acknowledgement that this had a real, lived and tangible impact on Black communities. And it continues to have that real, lived, tangible impact on those communities. And that there are so many structures that exist around the globe, including here in London, which were built on the backs of slaves. We know that there is so much money in our city, which was generated through the slave trade. And you look at the situation of Black individuals in the world, we have a poverty rate of around 32% in London. White people have a poverty rate of 17%. And that poverty rate has been pretty stable for about 20 years and or more. So when you have groups of individuals who are continuously experiencing difficulties in being able to thrive and to progress, and to have access to everything that everyone else has access to, we simply are saying there has to be an acknowledgement of the way that slavery and other structures which demeaned and oppressed groups of people, there has to be an acknowledgement that that has had a long-lasting impact. It's not about blaming individuals in the current day. It's about acknowledging that that is a thing and doing what we can to address it. So that's all I think we need. That conversation needs to shift, I think.
Yeah. I remember, I think it was Sadiq Khan who tweeted about the memorial.
Yeah.
And I commented underneath the tweet saying, about time. Because I felt like this was something that was long overdue. Yeah. And for some reason, maybe like 2 weeks later, I was looking at like my replies on Twitter. I never do this, but for some reason I had a look, and the replies to me saying about time, like literally, go back to Africa, you're ugly, why don't you, the worst for simply saying about time. And I think what that kind of highlights is that people don't want to acknowledge the past. They don't want this history to exist. And in some ways, would you say that the rhetoric that's out there about slavery, about racism, about diversity, equity, and inclusion, do you think that this is an attempt to hijack these things and actually erase them?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think you're right. And can I just also say I'm really sorry that
I was rattled.
That happened to you.
I've never been
That's
rattled.
Awful.
Honestly, like whenever I see racist comments or nasty comments, it doesn't tend to affect me. But I think because to me, it was just such a simple statement to make. I had not expected the amount of vitriol that I got. That really did rattle me.
Yeah.
I remember it did rattle me. But, simply because people don't want, this to be acknowledged. They don't want to hear about racism. Quite frankly, it seems like we're entering this new era of reverse racism where people can say, if you call out racism, they say, no, you're racist.
Yes.
Or you want diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yeah, but that's anti-white.
Yeah.
But no one's going back to the root of why this exists. And that memorial would be the root. It would be highlighting why initiatives exist, why, schemes exist, why we talk about racism. Where do you see it all going? Do you think that there's a way to kind of divert back to a path that makes sense, a path where we can talk about equality in a way that's constructive? Do you think that the political climate allows for that? Do you think society allows? Can it happen?
I mean, I have to remain optimistic.
Okay.
I think you just, when you work on these issues, you have to have an element of hope. Otherwise, there is no point. So I have to remain optimistic. I think at the moment we are seeing a real coming together of lots of commentators who are whipping up division and doing so happily. And I think with Donald Trump becoming the president, that has enabled that whipping up to become even more feverish. But, the far right has been in ascendancy across Europe. And we know that there have been political commentators in our previous government who have whipped up all sorts of anti-migrant, anti-Muslim, anti-Black narratives. I think that this is going to be a challenging year. And I think, I'm trying to be really diplomatic about it, but I really think it's going to be hard. I think it's going to be difficult who work on these issues. You're going to have so many stories that you will be writing and sharing because And I think we need to be just aware of that.
Okay.
I think it's important for us to not hide away from it, and just be ready. At the same time, I think that there are so many people who see it for what it is, both in the political space, but also in our community spaces. We've got an excellent sort of VCS sector, voluntary community and faith sector. We've got so many writers, so many journalists, so many people out there who see it for what it is. And we will have to just continue to use our voices and to counter a lot of what we see. So there was an article that came out, I think it was a couple of weeks ago in the Daily Telegraph, which was talking about the numbers of migrants, illegal migrants,
yes, I know
that Keir Starmer and Sadiq Khan had let into the country. Their stats were wrong. But that story was picked up by The Sun, the Daily Mail. It's the way that a stat like that, or a statement which is clearly wrong and inaccurate, can just be said and put out into the world, and people will respond to it on social media and elsewhere, and then just carry it forward. And that's the thing that I think worries me the most. It just gets picked up by people, and it creates a really damaging debate on social media and elsewhere. And that's the thing we have to be cognizant of that. We have to be there, able to call out those inaccuracies where they exist, because as much as we might not want to just engage with some of these narratives because it gives them oxygen, and that is true, at the same time, we can't allow the falsehoods to just exist in the atmosphere. So we have to be completely cognizant and aware of it. So my message to those of us working in these spaces is, it is disheartening. It is going to be difficult, but I think there are a lot of us who know that this is just a moment in time that we have to ride out. And if we stand together, I'm going to start getting really preachy in a minute, but if we do, seriously, there's so much strength in numbers. And if we stand together and if we back each other up, and allyship is going to be so important over the next year or so. So just, speak out where you see something, and particularly when you see communities just being dehumanized. If you can do anything to stand alongside them, that would make such a difference to them.
I don't like your predictions
because
they're right all the time. You predicted 2019 that following Brexit, there was going to be a surge in hate crime, in racial hate crime, I think specifically. But obviously you're saying people should come together, should be allies, should speak up when they see, people being dehumanized. I feel like the feeling around Londoners, especially Black Londoners, is that they just want to leave. Yeah. Just leave. It's become so hostile. Mm-hmm. I feel like a lot of people genuinely don't see a future in the UK because it is hostile from the top down. This is coming from the loudest voices, the biggest platforms. It's not Joe Bloggs in his basement, although Joe Bloggs will come out of his basement and type some horrendous stuff on social media. But it's coming from the top, whether it's politicians, whether it's the media. People, I think, are sort of losing heart with London. I'm sure there are times you yourself feel like, you try to be optimistic, but inside sometimes you can't help but feel like, where is it all going?
Yeah. And that I had, that I'm aware of that, because I remember around the time of those riots that you mentioned last summer, and there was some of those debates, wasn't there, around, there were some Black people on social media saying, hasn't happened here. I'm really glad I live in London. And others,
Oh yes,
others outside of London saying, oh, you know, what about us? Don't forget about us. But then I think the steady stream that has occurred ever since then, I've seen people say it is time to leave. It's time to think about where else to go. And that's really sad. That's the reason that is sad is because, yes, at the same, I have to be optimistic. This is, you know, the optimism has to be there because I can't allow them to win. I literally cannot. And what's sad about it is that this is our home. I was born in this country. My children were born in this country. And even for those who weren't born in this country, because 40% of Londoners were born outside of the UK. But this is their home, right? Why should we leave our home because racists are creating this hostility around us? Because that's the ultimate aim. The ultimate aim is for them to achieve the go back home to
deport.
Gets correct.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to let them do that. And I think the thing for me also sort of on a personal level is because I have children and, you know, when you get into a space like this, when you're working on these issues, you need, even as hard as it gets, and it gets really, really hard, you need to just continue in order to try to make it less painful for your kids. And it's one of the things I remember once. Me and my husband once we were sat down once, and I think because I've got 3 children, so I hadn't had my third yet. We were talking about maybe we should just go to Canada. Maybe we should just leave.
Why is it
I
always
don't know. I don't know. I had a couple of friends who moved to Canada. Like, you know.
Seems pleasant.
Yeah. Just like, should go to Canada. They have their issues.
But yeah, Canada seems to be a place of choice for people.
Yes.
Even though it's freezing.
I know.
Okay, so you actually genuinely thought about...
We did. And it didn't, I mean, it wasn't a long, it was a pipe dream. I mean,
what sparked that?
I think it was because, I think it was similar to perhaps some of what younger people are experiencing now. We were at moments in our careers where we were just thinking it's so hard to get by. I've worked, so before I became deputy mayor, I've been in the voluntary and community sector, and it's a wonderful sector to work in, but it's a thankless task, and it's difficult working on race issues when you don't see the shift that you need to see, and also just financially, it was difficult. And so you have this sort of perception that it's going to be easier elsewhere. I mean, we've thought about America, we thought about Canada, we thought about all of these places. But actually, you know, this is, as I keep saying, this is our home. And also, I just felt that there was still so much I still had to do. So I needed to stay here in order to be able to do it. But I understand
wanting to leave.
Yeah. I do understand
How did you feel seeing the summer riots unfold? How was that for you? Because like you say, people were like, oh, London's going to be fine. I remember on TikTok, people were like, well, bring it on to London. Yeah. But how was that for you as somebody who is the deputy mayor, you know, seeing that? Did you feel helpless in some ways?
I was afraid.
You were afraid?
Yeah, I was afraid. I was afraid because I saw the vitriol and I saw the violence and I saw the hatred on the faces of those people who were trying to get into that hotel where those asylum seekers were hiding and fearing for their lives. And I was afraid because I could see just that spreading. I could see it spreading to other parts of the UK. And whilst I know that in London, there are so many people who have chosen to come and to stay here because it's diverse. People want to be in a diversity. And so I knew that London would be a place where people would come out in their hundreds and their thousands and say, you know, and so when I saw what happened in Walthamstow, down the road from where I live, I was really grateful, but I was afraid. And when the list of all of those immigration law centres and migrant rights organisations in London was circulating, and we did some really important work trying to allay fears, speaking to all of the London MPs and the political leaders of all of the different boroughs, working with the Met, making sure that we were keeping people as safe as possible. When I saw that one of them was in Walthamstow, right by the tube station that I use every day, I told my son he wasn't allowed to go out. And I made sure that all of my children, regardless of where they were not going to be near that station. And I know, I mean, the thing is that once everybody saw on the news how many people came out and it was such a positive sign, I was relieved, but I was fearful. I was fearful for my children. I was fearful for those young people on TikTok saying, bring it on. I was fearful that it would lead young people of colour to get themselves into trouble. And I wanted this as far away from us as possible. But also I was fearful because it just felt like it was the 70s again. And I was a child in the 70s. And I remember how scared as a child, you know, children are not always the most logical when it comes to things that they don't have full information about. I was scared of white people. I was scared of skinheads. If I saw a person with a pair of Dr. Martens and, you know, the uniform that they wore at the time, I would start crying. And so when I saw all of that, it just took me back to the 70s.
That must have been quite traumatizing.
So it's just, and I wasn't the only person who had that visceral experience. I spoke to Asian women, particularly Muslim women, older Muslim women, who said this just reminded them of what it was like in the 70s, how scared they were. And it makes me scared, but also so angry that that was what they were doing to our communities. I mean, I'm glad that we didn't have those scenes in London. But at the same time, that really visceral fear that I know lots of people experienced it's unacceptable that we should have that in 2024.
I mean, you're seeing that as a child, then you're seeing your children experience that. It's a bit demoralizing, isn't it?
It really is. It really is.
I remember when the riots broke out, it was actually my daughter's first birthday.
Oh,
ruined.
Melissa. Oh.
Ruined. I was just like, I can't believe this is happening.
Oh, my goodness.
We wanted to go out. We ended up going out in the end. We drove because we didn't want to get the train. But it really hit me that, oh my God, like this child that I've just brought into the world, this is how they're seeing in the first year of their life, with people literally going after people who look like her. And it's so sickening. And I don't know I know you're saying people need to speak up. They need to be louder. They need to raise their voices against, you know, racism. But it's just difficult because I feel like the way that politics works now, what's going on in America, it has an impact.
Yes.
And I think it's pushing politics further and further to the right, even for people who are on the left, because it just broadens the range of what is appropriate, what's not appropriate, what's good and what's not good, you know? When Trump comes out and says, you know, DEI caused people to die in this tragic plane crash.
Yeah.
And that gets repeated over and over on social media. The owner of X, you know, is repeating these things.
Yeah.
They have a lot of power.
Yes, they do.
Schools, do they play a part in sort of I mean, they should play a part, really, shouldn't they, in trying to stop the spread of disinformation. Do you think enough of that is being done?
I think, I mean, I think that schools, like a lot of institutions, are probably at a loss as to how to properly control the way that those messages are filtering through to young people via social media platforms. I think you're right to mention X. There is a huge level of responsibility that those who own those platforms have on just monitoring and mediating and stepping in when people are experiencing incredible forms of racism, like the racism that you described, that you had when you look, but never look below the line. When you look below the line, it's awful. When I look below the line, I can't function for a whole day when I see what people say. But you're tempted to do so because you don't know that all of the comments are going to be like that, right? So firstly, I think that the social media companies have a huge level of responsibility, and I know that there is legislation that we have in the UK, which is ostensibly trying to hold those social media companies to account. But I think on that point around the way that schools and others can work with young people, the reason that I say that a lot of institutions are at a loss is because of the pervasive way in which social media has become a clear part of our young people's lives. But then at the same time, there is work to be done around like critical literacy, media literacy, critical thinking, helping young people to be able to understand when they are being led down the garden path, quite frankly, giving them the skills that they need to be able to spot when disinformation and misinformation, because they're two different things, but when these things are being circulated, and giving young people the tools to be able to discern between fact and fiction, teaching them how to check out their sources. I mean, my son is 16. He spends way too much time on TikTok. He knows that. He'll probably be thinking, did you go and tell the woman about TikTok? Did you do it? I'm sorry, I've done it. And I know that a lot of young people get their news from TikTok. A lot of young people get their news from social media. I mean, he has me on him constantly saying, you know, where did you find that out? What did you read? What did you think about it? Did you test it somewhere? And I'm sure he's fed up to the back teeth of that. But there is a role that schools can play in helping young people to be able to manage that. But then at the same time, we just need those social media companies to have a degree of responsibility. I think the thing with X, which is so worrying, is that, and I don't know if you've noticed this because you post on X, is that it has become this place where the toxicity of the argument is so pervasive. You put something out there and then all of a sudden, literally, the first responses will be so violent and so derogatory. And that has worsened over time ever since X was bought by Mr. Musk.
Yeah. I think, to be honest, being on X is something that I am considering, you know, I want to leave because, but I also understand the argument that by leaving, then, you know, there is a void where people aren't getting the right information. Like you say, it's constant abuse. It's constant abuse. Who wants to be waking up, going on social media and being abused for simply stating facts, really? So it is something that I've considered. But again, you know, if you leave, then what happens? So I am battling that decision about whether to leave or not. But I feel like we're almost playing catch up in this country specifically. when it comes to misinformation, disinformation, helping children discern what's true and what's false. Because now we've got AI coming around the corner.
That's true, yeah.
It feels like we haven't even got to grips with social media and the disinformation that's on there, let alone AI now being thrown into the mix. Yeah. And I remember, to be honest, I've been fooled. I have been fooled by AI.
Oh, wow.
Fortunately, it wasn't anything drastic.
What happened?
You know what? I'm going to have to speak to this friend when this goes out. But I have a friend, they have like a YouTube channel. And I won't even say what content they posted, but they posted something. And it was quite impressive. I was like, wow, this is amazing. Then I find out it's AI generated. I can't say what because it would expose them.
Sure.
But it was AI generated. And I felt so let down because I was like, I genuinely thought this was real, but it was completely fake. So when you think that that's the next hurdle that we have to tackle and we haven't even got a grip of what's going on, do you think people are too enthusiastic about AI and they should be more cautious?
I mean, yes, but you know, this is a middle-aged woman talking, but yes, I do. I know that there was a situation where my boss, Sadiq Khan, had an experience of his image being
and his
used.
voice.
Yeah. And so I know that it can be dangerous. I mean, I worry about it on that level. I also worry about it on the level that, you know, I work on issues to do with poverty and trying to get people into work. And there are those issues about the impact it can have on industries and sectors and the potential for different jobs to no longer exist. And we already need to try to make our labour force, our labour market, more open, more inclusive for the huge numbers of young people that will be seeking work. And yes, AI is a growing industry, and it's something that hopefully will be welcoming to young people of all ethnicities, all backgrounds. But then at the same time, I worry about the impact it will have on existing jobs. And so it just has to be managed incredibly carefully. And that situation with Sadiq was really worrying. Just knowing if you've got your image out there, then anyone could do anything with your voice, with your image. So yeah, it's a bit of a worry.
Well, we'll see what happens.
Yes.
I mean, like you said, this year,
yes,
it's not looking too great. But I know you're doing a lot of work that you're trying to help people. What kind of things are you working on at the moment?
Well, I mean, just on that point about the year coming up, we're launching a campaign on Valentine's Day. Mm-hmm. It's Loved and Wanted, and it's effectively about us trying to send that message of reassurance to Londoners who feel targeted by the rhetoric and the divisiveness and the narratives that are being used by the far right and by others. And to let them know that London is their home and always will be. I don't think we can ever underestimate how much making people have a sense of belonging in their own place matters for them. And it's just about making sure that they know that we are always not just here for them, but we will be the ones who will stand up for them, stand alongside them, and we will encourage those who can and feel able to also be able to speak out and stand alongside people. I work on migration issues here. I chair something called the Strategic Migration Partnership, and every time there is a set of global tensions that can have an impact on communities here in London, we have to make sure we're being responsive. So with the war in Sudan, also we have been making sure that we have all of the structures in place, be it accommodation, be it access to, English language lessons, schools, or school places, all of those things that people need. And so we do that because we know that global tensions are rising. We have a climate crisis. People flee. They flee war. They flee terror. They flee when their homes are no longer as they should be because of the changing climate. And we want London to be a welcoming place for them. Now, we know in the current climate that having conversations about immigration are problematic for all of the reasons that I'm sure you're aware. But we have to be the ones who show that leadership and who issue that message of welcome, but also put, our policies where our message is, and make sure that when people do need to come here, that we have everything that they need to feel part of our city. I think it's important for us to make sure that people don't feel isolated or overwhelmed or alone. I think, when you're in a position like mine, you often do have those moments where it just becomes too much. I once tried to get out of race equity because I'd spent, 12, 15 years working on racial justice issues, education, school exclusions, work, criminal justice system, and it just got too much. And I said, right, that's it. I need to do something else because it was affecting my own mental health. I went into poverty reduction, as you do.
Oh, well.
And then, because I thought, poverty reduction is something that impacts everyone, and it does. But,
ultimately,
if you're from a minority ethnic background, you're more likely to be in poverty. And here I was again. So, I think that we need to send out that message of hope because it will be difficult, and it's just important for people to know that when it gets too much, there are people out there who will be advocating for you. The one thing, though, that I do want to say, and I think it's important, is that the impact that racism has on mental health is just enormous. And if you're Black, your risk of having a mental health crisis or breakdown is much higher than for other groups. And that's because racism has a tangible impact on your health. And in as much as I am saying, try and speak up and speak out, at the same time, if you can't, don't, please, because I know the impact that it has on our communities, and I know the impact that it has on our people, and it's not always our fight.
There'll be somebody else who can pick up. Yeah.
Please.
And that's the beauty about community.
Yes, it is. It is.
Well, thank you so much, Debbie. I really wish we had more time, but I think we've chewed the fat on a lot of different things. I'll enjoy watching this back, but I just want to say thank you so much for coming and being here and giving your time and letting people hear from you and see you. And, hopefully this will be a sense of reassurance to people out there who are wondering, what's the mayor doing for us? So, thank you so much for tuning into the space. If you'd like to see more of this content, you can subscribe. And also you can subscribe to my newsletter, which recaps stories on Black, Asian and Arab communities living in the UK. And all those details will be in the description box. So until next time, thank you very much. Goodbye.